Great. Hello, welcome. Thanks for joining us for next chapter, career literacy for library staff. Today we're going to talk about different kinds of transitions in libraries, transitioning out of libraries, transitioning back into libraries, and then looking at transitioning between types of libraries. Quick note, I think a lot of you are from outside of Minnesota. So just a quick who we are. Metronet is one of Minnesota's 7 state-funded multi-county, multi-type libraries. What that means is we serve all library types. We're kind of a library for libraries. And we serve all library types in the metro area, the Twin Cities metro area. I'm Stephanie Slaughter. I am the programming librarian. Ann Walker Smalley is our director. We'll talk about her in a little bit. And then we have Kelsey Baum, our HR consultant. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Kelsey.
Good morning, everyone. We're really happy to have you here. Like Stephanie said, a lot of you are our first timers, but this is not a first time in our series of Next Chapter Career Literacy. Today, as you know, you registered for, and we're so happy to have you here for career transitions with our excellent panel. I can't say enough good things about them. I'm excited for you to hear from them. Doing a little bit of a review of where we've been and where we're going. 2 sessions ago, we did Researching Your Options, Explore Careers for Librarians. Last session, we did for managers how to create effective job postings. And I really want to advertise the next session that we have coming up in April that Stephanie talked about in the email this morning, but a mini job club. So actionable advice to improve your job search. We, throughout this series, have found that templates showing resumes, resume corrections, LinkedIn profiles, all of these how-tos with, again, actionable advice has been the most helpful for people in their career considerations and job search. And so we will be spending next session on reviewing your resumes, your LinkedIn, answering any questions that you have, and not recording that session with respect for people's privacy and getting them to engage. That's another thing that I want to share with everyone is that all of these sessions are designed like a series of a book, while each one is hopefully good standalone. They do build off of each other and have inter mix and mingle connections. Um, we want this to be as informative and interactive as possible so that it is helpful for you. So please feel free to at any time put any questions, comments, concerns, jokes in the chat or come off mute, ask a question, engage with our panelists. But that's how this is designed to work is we want it to be helpful, we want it to be engaging, and in order to do that as best as we can, we need your engagement. Here is a summary of the different sessions that we've had. Like I said, all designed to be good standalone, hopefully, but they all do connect with each other. This is the link here of everything we've done so far in the series. If you hear something that we mentioned today that we've mentioned that we've talked about in a last one of our previous sessions, you can reference this link here to view all of the slides as well as the recordings for previous sessions. And with that, I'm going to say, hit it, Carol, and have our wonderful moderator. I was joking with saying, hit it, Carol, in our practice, but I just did it. So um, she is now going to kick things off and help the rest of us get to know each other. Thank you for being here.
And Kelsey, I am just disappointed that I did not get entrance music, but next time we'll figure that out.
Next time.
Yeah. So good morning, everyone. My name is Carol Jackson, and I currently work as the Director of Outreach and Engagement at Selco, which is a regional library, as explained earlier. I am your moderator. I am also a panelist because I had a little career transition of my own out of libraries and then back again. So I would love to have our panelists introduce themselves to you, but as we're doing that, and while it's happening, I would love to hear from you, um, a little bit about you, why you're here, and if you could put in the chat, what is your current role, your location, and then why are you interested in this particular session? More specifically, what's most interesting or intimidating to you as you think about pursuing a career outside of libraries? So please do share in the chat. As Kelsey mentioned, please also feel free to unmute and say your piece, ask a question. You can use the chat, you can unmute. We are very easy here. And with that, I would love to introduce you to your panelists. Um, so we heard a little bit from me, but we'll hear a little bit more later. But right now, I'm gonna pass it over to Amy. Oh gosh,
Don't even do it. It's okay.
mm, Amy, I have seen your name and know you, and I just blanked. So
It,
Amy is here
yep,
to
yep.
introduce herself.
Yes. Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Amy Stumptonagle. I am currently the Director of Property Records and Taxpayer Services in Washington County, Minnesota. Before that, I was the Library Director here for Washington County Library, and I'd also worked in a few other libraries. I went to UW-Madison to get my MLIS, and so I worked in several libraries there. I also worked in the Milwaukee Public Library as well. Yay, I know. Yay, UW-Madison. I'm guessing that's what that was for. Um, Maybe not, but yeah. So that's me. Before that, I had a whole other life in Hollywood, and I had a film career. But I'm yes, go Badgers. I am very excited to be here today, and excited to talk about this topic because I did make a big shift from libraries. So
Um,
thank you.
Amy, if we can just go back to
Yeah.
Hollywood,
Yes.
would we have seen you in anything? Is
Oh, no.
there?
No, no, that was not a thing. They even asked me once if my hands could be shot. Like there was this thing in a trunk, and they were like, "Oh, Amy, it was when I was in my 20s. They're like, "Oh, your hands look good. Will you do your hands?" I was like, "No, no, I'm not doing it." So no, I was associate producer on a couple of films that Disney made way back in the early 2000s. But yeah, no, you would not have seen me. I don't do that. Of
That is super fascinating, though. So thank you for sharing it.
course.
Bethany, tell us about your career journey so far.
Hi, I'm Bethany Kaufman, and currently I'm the director of Prairie Lands Library Exchange, which is one of the Minnesota multi-county, multi-type library systems in the southwest part of the state. But I actually started out as an elementary school teacher, and I did that for 11 years, and then decided that what I really loved was technology integration and literacy. And so I went back and got my degree and my teaching license to be a school library media specialist. And I did that for 25 years. And I loved it. Everything pre-K through 12th grade, and in a variety of different settings, rural, suburban, high poverty. And that was great. And then I decided to be done teaching about 4 years ago and kind of retired from teaching and was a substitute teacher for a little while and then accepted the position here at Prairie Lands. So I went from being a school librarian to being the person who supports libraries and museums and historical societies in southwestern Minnesota. And I'm also an adjunct professor at St. Cloud State University.
Bethany, what do you teach?
I teach um, information access and cataloging. Sounds really exciting, doesn't it? I'm trying to make cataloging extremely fun. It's a big challenge.
And then, what grade did you teach for 11 years?
I taught kindergarten.
Oh, okay.
Probably not hard to tell.
Yeah.
A little dramatic. That always keeps the children's attention. So yeah, kindergarten was
Explain it all.
absolutely difficult, hard, and exhausting. And people used to say, must be nice to play all day. People literally said that to me all the time. And I was just like, oh, you have no idea, right? They come to you with so many needs, and some of them are like reading at a third grade level, and some have never learned their last name. So
Hmm.
yeah, it was emotionally exhausting, just like service of any kind to a community is.
And I'm sure we've never heard in this group, oh, it must be so nice to read all day. You
Exactly.
work in a library. Awesome.
Exactly it. It's the same.
Which we will are kind of going to talk about a little bit later on, sort of that perspective of libraries and what we deal with when we're moving in and out of them. But before we do that, let's hear from Ann Walker Smalley.
I'm Ann Walker Smalley. I'm the director of Metronet, and I have been the director of Metronet for quite a while. I have had somewhat of an eclectic career over the years because I had two significant transitions career-wise. One was by choice and one was by chance. So I think we'll hear a lot about that. But I truly believe that I have been successful throughout my career because of the foundational skills that one does learn in library school. Because we can apply our skills in so many different areas. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go forward. But, it's always difficult to transition, and there are a lot of things that go into that as you know, or as you're thinking moving forward. It took me two times to get this job. That's for one. Applied twice, and the second time they hired me. So, if there's one thing you have to keep in mind, it's persistence.
How many years were in, was it the same hiring? Like,
Oh, it was several years apart
oh, okay.
because if we you can see my career transition. I worked for the State Library of Minnesota for barely a year and was laid off. And then there was a period of scrambling. What was I going to do? And I applied for the Metronet job, and that would have been around 2003. And I wasn't hired until 2007. So they hired Tom Shaughnessy, who used to be the director at the University of Minnesota Libraries, he used Metronet as his retirement job. So that was after that. I did work with Tom, but anyway, it's a
Don't
side.
you, don't you ever feel like when you do that that you should say, "Hey, it's me again. What's up?"
Yeah, I did say that. Because, well, I think this will come out as we talk throughout this, but you know, during that period of what am I going to do next, I did so much consulting and contracting work with the library systems that a lot of these people already knew me because, I volunteered here, I did something else there. So, yes, hello, remember I applied for this before, just look at my resume.
Hmm.
Here's the amendment.
Hmm. So, we have like a little bit more detailed information on our particular jobs and where our journey through them. But I would like to start with the very basic question for our panelists of what made you want to pursue a career outside of libraries? And I will happily take anybody who wants to talk. And Stephanie, if you could put up their biography when they talk, that would be awesome.
I'd love to tell you why I left school libraries because it's so pertinent to what we're dealing with right now. Um, we had a community member contact not even my school, another school, asking about a specific book. You can imagine, right? And that colleague looked up the book for this community member and told them it was in my library. And they didn't speak to me, didn't speak to my principal, went straight to the school board and the superintendent. And so I was kind of not given my chance to talk to the community member, which I think we all know. Once you sit down and talk to them and listen, give them compassion and try to understand and reassure them, usually you can resolve some of these situations, but that didn't happen. And I went home that night and said to my partner, I'm going to get thrown under the bus. They do not care. 35 years serving this community doesn't matter right now. And sure enough, that community member who did not have school children in any of the schools in our district, a very large school district, 30 schools. So very, very large. I was in a very large high school at the time. And and the school district had decided to remove their policy and have a procedure instead. And that meant that they didn't need to follow it. So there was no reconsideration policy followed. And the community member asked the state of Minnesota to remove my teaching license and asked the school district to fire me, to let me go. And the school district told me that I wasn't allowed to speak to anybody about it. I couldn't speak to anyone. And so every day I would leave work thinking, is somebody going to try and kill me on my way to my car? You've all been through this, right? This was 5 years ago. So maybe just a little bit before it had really gotten ramped up in Minnesota. And my union demanded the school district apologize and make a public statement that I had done nothing wrong. I'd followed every policy. And they refused to do that. So when it looked like I could maybe get out, I considered leaving at the end of my time as a teacher. So teachers in Minnesota have, from back in the olden days, if you started like I did back in the 80s, you had the opportunity to leave once your years of service and your age equaled 90. And I was hitting that the coming school year. And so I told the school district, listen, I'll just leave in the fall. I'll hit my date that I can go. And they said, we will. Why they wanted me to stay, I don't know. But they said, if you don't stay, the entire school year will consider that breach of your contract, which they'd never done before. Teachers always left when they hit their rule of 90, and have your teaching license removed. And that makes it sound like I had an adversarial relationship with them through my career, and I didn't. These were people I knew and had good relationship with, and it's just a lot of community pressure. And so I just quit and I was done and decided that I could survive on subbing for a while and looking for something else. But that's a painful reason to leave, right? After so many years in one school district. So,
And Bethany, how did it feel to consider going back into libraries after that experience?
I was hesitant. I remember my interview, I asked a lot of questions about the governing board here. I wanted to know a lot of things about how they were organized and run and what kind of support the director had, and what kinds of issues their governing board had, because I understood I had served on the governing board for the Central Minnesota Libraries Exchange, which is the Central Minnesota multi-county, multi-type, when I was a school librarian. And I just didn't want to end up in a place where I would feel unsupported again, or there was going to be a lot of drama or controversy. I just wanted to be someplace where I could serve again and enjoy people. So yeah, I was a little worried.
Yeah. But it's working out well.
It's worked out great.
Great.
I love it. Yep, it's all good. They were wonderful. So
Good. Amy, what's your story?
Yeah, my story is it's very different. My current position found me. I was not looking for it. I was happy with the Washington County Library System. I was happy being the library director. I never thought I would go anywhere else. The county, I mean, honestly, they got desperate. They couldn't fill the property records taxpayer services position. My boss, the deputy county administrator, she oversaw both property records taxpayer services and the library. And so she had to get creative. And so she asked if I would consider temporarily taking on the role as director of property records taxpayer services. Yes, Stephanie Washco Library is great. They are the best. I will always, always love them. I will always love libraries. I feel in a way that I've kind of betrayed libraries in a way by leaving. I feel kind of guilty and bad because I do love them so, so, so much. But the opportunity to learn something brand new to me, it was just, and to find something else that was just challenging in a different way. And, as librarians, we're lifelong learners, right? Like we love to learn. And the thought of learning about property taxes, elections, our license centers, like it was too much for me not to take that opportunity. So it was, like Ann said before, it was definitely by chance, not by choice that it found me. But I'm really, really grateful that I did. And it's worked out really, really well. I'm so glad it was temporary at first. That's the only way I would have tried it, right? To see if it was a good fit. And it did turn out to be a really, really great fit for me. So nothing made me want to go. But we got desperate here in Washington County, and they went looking for a director for property records taxpayer services, and they came to the library director, and it worked out really, really well. for me.
So, Amy, we had some questions near to the end about like the emotional toll of leaving,
Yes.
libraries, which can be very mission driven.
Yeah.
How have you kept a hand in libraries if you have?
Yeah. Well, it honestly, it hasn't been easy. And I feel for the person who took my job as library director, right? Like she had to come in after me. I was still here and all of that. So I try to take a really light touch. Like I don't involve myself too much. And tell myself, not my circus, not my monkeys anymore. Like it's okay. But I have been really happy with how much I can advocate for our libraries, and especially our public library system. And it makes me sad, but I'm glad I can step in. But like sometimes when you're a librarian or a library worker, you loving libraries doesn't mean as much to people as if you're not in libraries, right? Like, so I almost feel in ways that I can be a stronger advocate being outside the library system than I can when I was inside the library system. So that's been really great. But there has definitely been an emotional toll. And I do feel, I mean, I think this is mostly on my side. No, I mean, librarians, library staff, they're all lovely people. Like they didn't do anything to make me feel guilty, but I do kind of have that guilt, especially because I became the library director in 2018, and then I left to be the property records taxpayer services director in 2022. So I wasn't there as long as I thought I would be. Like there were so many things I didn't get to do, and the library system had been through a lot of ups and downs. Like we had a lot of, several different directors. And like I saw myself as I was a director who was going to stay there. I was going to be there at least a decade. I was going to, reestablish our firm foundation. That's what I was going to do. And so I did feel bad when this other opportunity came for me, and for taking it. And I really, even when it was temporary, I didn't think I would take it. I really didn't think I would make the jump. But so it's been tough. And I do feel like, the library staff who are here, they're wonderful, like I said, but I do feel like they see me in a little bit of a different way. Like I do kind of feel in a way that I betrayed them a little bit by leaving. Um, but also some of them have, I run elections now for Washington County. And so a lot of times some of them will come over and help with elections, or like they'll come and still do that. So that makes me feel really good. I'm trying to bring some of my old life to my new life, which feels really, really nice. And I love the opportunity to get library staff to see what else public service has to offer and how much is out there, especially in local government, county government. So yeah, it was difficult and very emotional. And my kids still don't understand what I do. Which when I was the library director, that was great. They're like, libraries, books, we know what you do. But now they're like, what are property taxes, right? All they understand that I do is run elections. So they talk about election. Like, yep, mom runs elections. She's gone. She doesn't get home until 3 o'clock in the morning on election night. We know what that is. But yeah, it's definitely challenging. But for me, it's definitely paid off as well.
I love that idea of the active advocating you can do. And, for sure being in the same county, bolstering
Yeah.
up the library, but also for people who are thinking about leaving libraries but have a little sense of a betrayal. That's such a fantastic way to
Yeah.
keep spreading the message.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. And how about you? Oop, mute.
Sorry. So you can see by this slide that I'm a very linear thinker. And asked to be on this panel made me think about my career in a linear way. And as I said originally, I have had two transitions, one by choice and one by chance. The first one, I worked at the State Library of Ohio. I worked at Battelle Memorial Institute, which is a huge research and development corporation. I worked for the Library of Congress there. So through those two positions, I was in library development at the State Library. So you're always working to provide technical assistance to people. And here's a piece of advice I give to new librarians is choose your first job wisely if you can, because that really set me on a course of the confidence and knowledge to advise governments and other organizations about libraries and library issues. Battelle which nobody had ever heard of in libraries prior to the pandemic, because Battelle is who contracted with OCLC to do the COVID, how long does COVID live on a CD case research. So that was fascinating. That was a lot of travel. It was exciting. I probably visited 36 of the 50 states because they had libraries for the blind and physically handicapped, which was their name at the time, as well as various other things. My first transition was by choice to move to Washington, D.C., where I did enter libraries. You see, I worked at HUD, which was not as a federal employee. It was under an A76 executive order to privatize government. And I'm not a big fan of privatizing government. However, this library needed a catastrophic change. It had been neglected. We had mailbag after mailbag of unfiled court reports. It was a nightmare. And then I moved to the National Restaurant Association, which is just as fun as it sounds, because it was mostly small business reference. We got to answer questions from the president of McDonald's, and you never knew, the next call could be from a guy with a hot dog cart, all in the same day, all within the same hour. It was really fun. Plus, everybody in the Washington office had to go to Chicago to work at the big National Restaurant Association convention, which really, it's like a dream convention. You go to a library convention and you think the OCLC booths are big? Yeah, no. It takes up all the exhibit space at McCormick and the McCormick Extension. And, like Miller Lite has, I don't know, a booth that's as big as where our office is. And, Mickey Spillane and the Miller Babes are all there. And plus food, lots of chances to try things. So it was fun. I had to work in the press room. So this is what's new in the food industry. But then the next transition was by choice, and that is when we moved from Washington, D.C. to Minnesota. And we came because we had a child that we did not want to raise in the hothouse of Washington, D.C. And we had family close by, so it made sense to move to Minnesota. It's a good place to live, as many of us will attest. But when I got here and started looking at library jobs, I thought, yeah, no. One, are these jobs part-time? Just based on the salary? I'm sure Amy knows how. And those of us who have worked in public libraries here, it's like, no, I just cannot work for $20 an hour. Sorry. And also I have, but at that time, my husband traveled all the time. And it was so being tied to somebody else's reference desk, where, if you're a part-time librarian or the new librarian, you don't get the best schedules. And so the issues of childcare and some other things entered. So then I had to decide, what was I going to do next? What are my library skills that I can apply in a new setting? So I started to freelance. And I did a lot of writing for grants, writing grant reports. I worked with organizations from the Hmong National Organization, which was trying to establish a written language for the Hmong community. And then I became a staff writer for a parenting nonprofit, and I have written thousands of pages of child development curriculum for various audiences. And my child attended Minnehaha Academy, which is a pre-K 12 private school. And that was, sort of a falling into a job, because I started to volunteer and they offered me a job. And it worked well for me to do that non-library transition. And that was probably a good 12 or 14 years. And during that time, of course, I was doing all the other things, kid management. I had a variety of side gigs. My sister and I did juried art fairs and sold our artwork at the farmers market. I did a lot of advocacy for a program in Minnesota called Early Childhood Family Education. It was great. I did a lot of volunteering at various things, political campaigns, the usual parental volunteering at school and Girl Scouts or whatever. And then there was a fateful day where I saw a job in the newspaper, I might add, for a library services consultant at the State Library of Ohio. It was very similar to what I had done in Ohio, so I applied and I was hired. It was part-time. And so I still worked part-time at Minnehaha, but also part-time at Library Development Services. And if you've had two jobs like that, you know it's always more than part-time. So eventually I had to say, sorry, Minnehaha, I'm going to be a librarian. But that only lasted a year. And let me say, that was a transitional year for a lot of people because we came very close to a Minnesota government shutdown. I started that job in April. So very close to a government shutdown towards the end of the fiscal year. It was the year of Gates Foundation computers and library. So I was lucky and got to go to Seattle for all that training twice. And I was in Seattle at that training on 9/11. So that was clearly a transitional point for everybody. Um, so we talk about uncertainty and stress. We were in Seattle for a week trying to figure out how we were going to get back to Minnesota. And I have nothing but positive things to say about the Gates Foundation. So that was fine. We got back working. And then MAPE, which is the Professional Employees Union for the state of Minnesota, went on strike. So that was a big year too, walking the picket line, doing all that. And then the beginning of the next year, my father died, and then I was laid off, and my husband was laid off. So that was probably a pivotal year for a lot of things in my life. And it was during that time I thought, maybe I should just go back to my previous life, not necessarily working back at the academy, but I could try to rebuild my freelance. And I went through a program called Women Venture here in the Twin Cities. Unfortunately, it's no longer in existence in the form that it was at that time. But it really helped me make a decision about what am I going to do? Because, it was 8 weeks long. It's a very supportive group of other women in transitional phases, some re-entering after having been an at-home parent forever, some people like me who are in this decision point, but it was very helpful. And so I decided, okay, yes, I really do like being a librarian. And so what am I going to do to get back into it? So that's when I did a lot of volunteering at library events. I was on the Minnesota Library Council, which was an ad hoc organization formed to prevent the complete closure of the Minnesota State Library. I was on a lot of Minnesota Library Association committees. And the other thing I did was a lot of consulting and contracting work with mostly public library systems. One of the best jobs I ever had was at Selco, which is where Carol works now. It was called Senior Techies, where we did a series of 5 classes in 15 locations, teaching old people how to use their internet. It was so much fun. I could have done it all day, every day. So I worked for a variety of those. And then, as I said, I applied to be MetroNet director, and they said, well, we really like you, but, and then I kept up contracting, volunteering, doing whatever, and applied the second time for MetroNet. And they did hire me that time. So I have been here. It was part-time when I started too, and eventually transitioned to full-time. And so we've done a lot at MetroNet in my tenure, and it's really a great job in a lot of ways for a particular type of person like me, who one has a lot of ideas and knows how to implement them. Because in Minnesota, the multi-types really don't have anything that truly defines what we absolutely have to do. So, and Bethany can speak to this, so can Carol, because she works closely in association with the Southeast multi-type. We define what our members need or want, or what we think they need and want, and then we can develop the programs to meet those. So I like thinking linearly, so that's why my slide looks like this. And I also like to think about what I've done.
So I think the idea of that really big turning point is a good one, of what created that change for you and where you really start to think about your career. Before we kind of move on, I just want to give a little bit of space in case anybody has something that they want to ask or contribute about their own experience in this group. So,
Lots of good comments in the chat. I hope people are reading along there. The unsustainability of working for $20 an hour. I remember looking at a job that was at a well-respected liberal arts college close to the Twin Cities, and it required 2 master's degrees. And while it was a 9-month contract, even so, it paid $30,000 a year. And it's like, seriously? You know, no. Who does, that's ridiculous. It is offensive, I agree.
yeah.
Because you know that the demands of a job like that, where, 2 master's degrees, one, I don't even like going to school, I'm one of those people who started college immediately out of high school, finished in 3 years, went to library school, finished that in like 1 year, and whatever. I'm not going back. Sorry. Um, so I just I assume they eventually filled a job, but really. Oh yeah, Alyssa, what are you thinking about that? Getting a MLIS after you already have a um non-MLIS master's, because people have to really like going to school, I think.
I love going to school. But having worked in libraries for 14 years now, I started the MLS degree and it was very much redundant to what I've already learned working in libraries. And ended up stopping just because it was boring to me, unfortunately.
I think it could have been boring to a lot of us, even though we me didn't have a second master's. Um, it does, especially if you've worked a long time in libraries, it's hard to find that new thing.
Mhm.
Can I jump in?
Sure.
Yes.
So I've had a really interesting career with libraries and went in and out of it. I actually started in libraries in college, and that was my 4 year work study program. And then later on, worked for them for a year when they had an opening. Then got pregnant, had to move away, struggled. Your 20s are horrible. I got a job at a school library. Like it was an emergency hire. Emergency hires had been fabulous. The problem was is I had to go back and get a master's. I was in my 20s with a newborn. I didn't have money for that. I'm still paying for my undergrad. So I left crying. They gave it to a third grade teacher. And it gets interesting. They gave it to a third grade teacher. I left, got a hair license so I could do hair. I tried different things. I worked on what I got my bachelor's in. So I worked in like creating commercials, just all different stuff. Then it opened up where I went on my kids' schedule, taught adult ed. Then, so I was a PALS tutor, like a tutor in the school, emergency position for a school librarian again. And I was like, oh, I've worked in libraries. They're like, oh, well, apply. I'm like, okay. So I applied. And when I applied, guess who was trying for it again? That third grade librarian. I mean, she went to the library. The one who got the job the other time, she got it again. But what happened is she decided not to move and they gave it to me. So I was teaching 7 classes a day, elementary, school library, SOLs, and everything, working my master's. Moved out of town. Guess what? State of Virginia would not give me a provisional license again. So then I couldn't be a school librarian. So again, it kind of worked on itself. Had they done that, I would have stayed in school libraries forever, though. It'd have been great. Summers off, enjoy working with the kids, love it. However, I would have missed out on the opportunity to work at public libraries and work with different age groups, university libraries, and working with like the education library and heading that up. And now I'm at a museum library. So you never know what's going to happen or where you're going to go. Um, so it's been a fascinating thing. And I was emergency hire here as well. I was emergency hire at several different places. So I would, even if you only have 85% of what they're asking for, apply. Because like where I'm at, no one can afford to live here. I'm in Florida now, and I never thought I'd be a librarian in Florida. But you know, no one can afford to live here, but I have a spouse. So that kind of helps me, to keep this job because things don't pay well, right? So I'm just saying between that, look at those emergency positions. If you've got 85%, because I would have never applied for the jobs here because they, you know, a second language in Italian or Japanese. I don't have that. I can work on Duolingo and work on my Italian, but I may have not have been, I don't have an art history degree. So I wouldn't have been a first rung hire, but I had 85% of what they need. I also, when I was looking to transition to move to another state, I worked for a children's literature database. So that was nice. So an opportunity came there because if you're in universities, they want you to write. I wrote book reviews. So I worked for CLCD for like 6.5 years. I got laid off. You know, things could be AI'd and things like that. But you know what? The last laugh is I do this half time, part time, and I am training AI part time. And before you get upset with me, I'm working on so that things are labeled correctly and so that if you're using Google, I mean, I'm guessing it's Google, there's a search engine, whatever, that you're getting the right stuff. We're looking at authority. We're looking at who's giving you this information. So, in a way, when you look at those fields, there's some things I don't agree with an influencer being the authority. I agree with the doctor. So it's very important to have librarians in that type of roles. So, I think that's a good transition out of librarianship too. If you can think about that. So, you're used to finding authority records and research and stuff. That could be an avenue you may want to look into.
Wow, Shelley, that's fascinating. Thank you so much. And I do also want to just leave it open for anyone else who wants to share their story. We are all here in the same Zoom slide, so I should be able to see who has hands raised or unmuting. But there's two kind of interesting paths that your story can take us on. And one is the sort of personal turning point, because behind every emergency hire there's somebody who said, yeah, I'll do that, sure, and that willingness to take that leap, even if the leap is not one that you intended on or planned for, can be a really interesting way to go. So my experience primarily is working in a public library here in the Twin Cities area, and because life is weird, I kind of leapt right into branch management and managed a couple of branches in our system. And I had a meeting with a librarian at a fellow branch or a fellow library system, and she was working at one of the most challenging libraries in the city. And at that time, my library system was like, nope, I'm going to stay right here. I don't want to go anywhere. I want to stay right here. And her theory was, sure, why not? Let's go. And that was really strangely relevant for me to say, yeah, this may not be my choice of a turning point, but I'll take that leap. And then, and so to my story a little bit, I also have a little bit of a negative story of getting out of libraries, which is having worked at this public library for like 20 years, loved it, fabulous, great work, loved it. There was a massive leadership change in my library system that just kind of, there was a move to change our library board from a governing board to an advisory board, which was, a really large structural change. We had interim leadership that maybe wasn't focused on libraries, and so times were challenging and things were extraordinarily stressful. And again, the luck of where you are in life, I applied for jobs, I looked outside of libraries. This is a really interesting topic because you always hear, oh, there's so many great opportunities for library staff and for those skills, but they are hard to find. Um, and I quit my job without another job, which is I've been working since I was 15. And like 2 months after I turned 15, my mother dropped me off at the Dairy Queen and said, "Don't come home without a job." So, like, not having a job was very odd. And as I thought about where I wanted my next path to be, I thought about, and this is like 2022, we had just come through COVID. Times were so hard for people, and times were so hard for people working in public service. And nobody stood outside and clapped for library staff, but we were working so hard to get people the services that they needed. And I found that through all of the everything that was happening in my library system, I didn't have the tools or the skills to help people in the way that I wanted to. And so to that end, I went through a coaching program, a accredited coaching program to learn how to work as an executive coach. And because I absolutely needed those skills. So I did that for a little bit, and well, not a little bit, a couple of years. Um, and when a regional library position came open that included coaching in it, um, that was a great place to go. And I've been there 2 years. I love the ability to support small and rural libraries. I love the expanse of service that you can provide, and also being able to use my coaching skills. Ugh, I didn't mean to say that much. Okay, so
I just
with
want to chime in about
yeah,
Carol
please.
too, because she is the facilitator of MetroNet's Library Leadership Forum. And I invited her to submit a proposal for that because I know what a great facilitator she is. And I think it builds on her coaching. And it's a monthly group that just meets informally on a regular schedule and talks about leadership topics. So Carol's been able to use a lot of her skills in leading that group too.
Mhm. Thank you, Anne. And I also, I think I see this so much with library staff that I come in contact with. There are so many amazing skills in libraries, and I think if you are able to do it, consulting can be a great way to go. And Kelsey, our our facilitator here, is a consultant. Kelsey, you didn't think you were going to get put on the point, did you? Nope.
I didn't, but you don't have to get ready if you stay ready, Carol. So hit me.
Yeah, so Kelsey, you're an HR consultant, and how did you make that leap?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to mention, and I'm seeing this thread through the chat, is that, and you mentioned it too, Carol. I love when you said life is weird because life is weird. And I will say that I don't think a lot of people, I know I sure didn't grow up wanting to be in HR, right? Because it's not everyone's favorite role, right? But I do think that there is a lot of overlap in librarians and library work as well as HR in terms of being a matchmaker for resources and helping people be successful to get what they want and need and where they want to go. So I was not planning on working in HR. I grew up wanting a life of adventure and foreign service, and so my degrees are in Italian linguistics, and my master's degree is in linguistics. And I fell into HR. I worked my way up through building the HR function at multiple different roles. My last corporate role was the global head of human resources for a brand, took us through acquisition. And throughout all of that, as I'm sure you can imagine, in different languages and different cultures, I learned a lot and have been through a lot of situations. And so when I also had a by chance change in job status, um, I took it as an opportunity to jump into consulting and both into consulting as well as even getting into HR in the first place was people saying, you have these incredible skills and I want you to help me with this one thing. And it's completely blossomed from there. And so, all of that to say is I never planned to be a consultant, and people told me for years that I would be. And now I really love helping small and growing businesses grow and design people policies and programs and benefits in a way that is good for people and also good for the organization.
Mhm. Thank you, Kelsey. Thanks for letting me put you on the spot there. I'm seeing a lot of people in the comments who are coming from academic institutions or libraries. Would anybody be willing to speak to where they're looking to bring their skills, or if they have any ideas about that? Hey, Joshua.
I'm currently at an academic. I'm looking mostly at other academics because it's what my background suits me best for, I think. But I'm also looking at things outside of librarianship in academia, like academic advising or something like that, because I've been on the one of the curriculum committees at the school for 6 years now. So advise students? Sure, I actually have an idea of what's going on in the curriculum. Um, Things like that, where it's just it's not library, but it's adjacent. There's a community college nearby with a job that I'm considering applying for that isn't a library job, but it's working with, they have a program to teach STEM to elementary and middle school kids, and they want a master's degree that's education related. And I interpret library science to be education related.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, yeah, I think I could do that. I've been a STEM librarian for a while. I don't have a lot of work with kids on my, but I think that's something that I could do. So a lot of what can I do and how can I squeeze it into a new shape?
Mm-hmm.
But I'm looking at all kinds of stuff.
So your thoughts about leaving libraries right now are not necessarily the institution that you're in.
No, the institution's great. I just don't do enough research to be able to do a tenure track position here. If the same job was here as non-tenure track, I would take it in a minute. It's a
Mhm.
good place to be. I just don't have it in me to do that constant research, publish research that I've done some, but not enough. And if that's not enough already, I can't do more. So
Mhm.
I'm not going to do more. And so I'm just looking for other ways to use. I smiled when there was the mention of 9/11. When 9/11 happened for me, I was at Offutt Air Force Base in Omaha, Nebraska, because I was a computer programmer in the Air Force, which is how I got to be a math and science librarian, even though my undergraduate is in theater arts. So I
Mhm.
I have a whole lot of I think as librarians, we excel as librarians because we are jacks of all trades, masters of none, and highly adaptable. That's what I think draws us to the field. And so, how do I take that mile wide and an inch deep set of skills and flow it into another background, hopefully something local, because my wife has set up her own photography business in the area and I want to keep supporting that. But
Mhm.
yeah.
That reminded me when you said a mile wide and an inch deep. So officially, the organization I work for is a nonprofit, but we receive all of our funding through the state of Minnesota. So we could go rogue, right? And that was a really difficult challenge to go from being a school librarian to being to running a nonprofit. And it's actually, if in Minnesota, this would be considered a relatively large nonprofit because of the amount of money that we manage each year. But I think that broad skill set, Joshua, and maybe it doesn't need to be super deep, but a really broad set of interests and skills is essential for running a small nonprofit because you really do everything. There isn't anyone to delegate anything to, right? You have I have one assistant. Um, so that's actually a hopeful piece, I think, for people. And academic settings would transition well, I think, into the nonprofit world because you do need to have kind of an understanding of how infrastructure works in an organization and a basic understanding of how like public funds are spent, right? Things like that. But I think that I'd be curious to know if anybody else has made a transition into a nonprofit because I think there's many jobs that library staff are qualified for that appear in the nonprofit career boards. And you really can, if you've been a director in a library, I think you have many of the skills that you need to be a director of a nonprofit, especially if you managed people.
That's a good point, Bethany, excuse me. I do think Joshua's point about adaptability is also key as people are looking to transition away from libraries because most of us are adaptable. There are people who don't like change, who want to continue straight and narrow path. But if you have that capability to be adaptable and to somehow translate your skills, and Joshua, not to put a plug in, but if you didn't attend the earlier sessions, you should go watch them because but we talked about resumes and LinkedIn and some of the things that will help reposition or refashion your approach to, as you say, squish it into a new shape. But adaptability, I claim to have what my husband always calls is the consultant mentality, which is you see a problem and you immediately start to generate alternatives, alternate solutions and how they could be implemented. That to me is a key skill as you're looking to what am I going to do next? And somebody on the chat, somebody said, "Oh, I transitioned out of nonprofits," and it's just like libraries. There are good nonprofits and bad nonprofits. The one I worked for in Minneapolis was great in the beginning, and then with leadership changes and funding changes and just bad decisions by its board, it eventually went out of business, which was sad. And I was at the goodbye party, and one of their board members said, "I don't understand how this happened." Well, I said to him, "I can tell you exactly how this happened. The board was not paying attention." And he was like, I don't know what, president of Piper Jaffray or something. And he was like taken aback that someone would tell him he wasn't doing his job right, but they were not doing their job right. You know, they hired the wrong person to be director, and then they didn't follow the finances. So nonprofits are great, but there are so many nonprofits in Minnesota that we see them come and go a lot. But it is a good career path for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think a lot of what I'm seeing in the chat here too, thinking about what Joshua brought up about tenure track, um, and this is sort of a theme that keeps coming through, is the question of the master's degree and how valuable is it? Is it giving you the skills that you need? And what happens if you don't have it and you have experience? And you know, it's quite a challenge, and I would really appreciate anybody who's kind of going through that to feel free to tell us your experience. All right. I always like to give a little time just in case somebody is like, "Where is my unmute? Help." Um, I'm seeing a comment about how whether the master's degree prepared you well. And I think as we think about the skills that transfer between nonprofits and libraries, I'd be so interested to know people who are currently in a program, whether you're getting those skills that you need to take your library work elsewhere.
MW has a interesting comment that they don't feel their MSLIS prepared them, and how much more employers weigh experience than they do having the degree. And, I think we hear both sides of that, where people have years and years of experience, but without the degree, they're not even considered for a position. So I don't know the solution to that issue other than keep trying. And somebody mentioned they feel stuck in their position. It is a catch-22. Stuck, how to get out of ILL. And maybe, it is that how do I develop my plan of action to get out of where I am currently, if that is the goal?
That reminds me a little bit of I had always thought about leaving teaching to do something different. Um, and so one of the things that I have told people who are in teaching, and I think it applies here also, is that I was content in my position, but during those content times, I never stopped looking at jobs. And so I began to get an awareness of what was out there that my skill set was fitting. Not all of us are in a position sometimes of the luxury of being content and having time to do that. But I never stopped for years looking at what was going on in library jobs, nonprofit jobs, in the business world, just to see like, hey, I could do that. And by doing that, I was building my confidence, I think, too, quietly along the way. So when I had the chance to look for other positions, it wasn't as surprising as I thought it might be. And I still do it today because you never know what the future holds, right? I enjoy looking and seeing what's going on around the state and around the country. So if you're in a position that you can tolerate, it is nice to be constantly looking at what other jobs are. Um, just you're getting a feel for things outside of the library world.
I think that's where LinkedIn can help too, because I don't know what boxes I have checked in on LinkedIn, but I get regular emails that say, "Oh, you're a high match for this job." And some of them I think, "Oh, I absolutely could do that." Others, it's like, "Chaplain, where did that come from?" I'm not qualified for that. But I think seeing those high match jobs and looking, then following through and really reading the job description does help you see how your library skills, because that's the focus of my LinkedIn profile, that's library all the time. It's also not particularly well updated, but if you're looking for a job, that's important too. But I think that's interesting to see. Okay, am I community engagement and outreach? Sure, I could do that. Same thing Bethany was saying. It just, in my case, I wouldn't have to go out and look. It comes to me because of LinkedIn. So I have a question for Amy, and that is, now in your new position as whatever that title is, it sounds so complicated, but includes
Yeah,
elections and taxes of all things.
I know.
You were reviewing applicants for a position in your department.
Yeah.
Would you look well upon somebody who has an MLIS or the skills that they've gained from working in a library?
Yes, I think I absolutely would, for a lot of the reasons that you've said here, and for other reasons. Like, I know in libraries, we have to be super resourceful. Like, you have to do a lot with so little. I think, and that's helped me really well here, get creative. I think also, like in my experience managing and being a leader for a library system, no one has ever held me to higher standards than librarians, like as a leader. Like library staff demand a lot of their leaders. And you have to really know how to manage people well and learn how to do that. And when you make a mistake, librarians will tell you. So for me, it was really, at the time it was always very hard to hear. But that helped me a lot, really keep those high standards. I think I view librarians and library workers in that way. Like we are held to a really, really high standard, I think. And I'm always looking for, employees who have high standards. The other piece too, I think a couple other things that I look for and that really help me here. If you're in libraries, you are used to begging for money. Like you are used to advocating. You are used to having to make a case for the funding and that impact that you have and having to sell yourselves and tell your story. So now I come here where I do property taxes. And let me tell you, like in libraries, people usually do, I mean, not always, but most people like you, right? Like you give libraries, like you're great. The property tax collector, they do not love us. At all. So it is really, really hard. But in this department, like I really do have to make a case for like what is our impact? What do we do in this department? And we've really I've tried to change our story a little bit of we register people to vote. Like people get their first driver's licenses from us. Like, yes, you have to pay a lot in property taxes. Everyone does, especially in Minnesota. But look at all you get, and I can speak for firsthand about what our libraries get from your property taxes and how that all works. So I think the other part too that kind of surprised me coming to this department is just how important it is to be able to translate really, really complex information into plain language or to help people understand. And those are definitely skills that I gained in library school, working in libraries. You don't know who's going to come up to you and ask you what kind of question. You have to be able to ask those open-ended questions. You have to be able to get at what people are really asking for. Because usually when people complain to me and call and say, my property taxes are too high, my property's valued too high, like that's not really what the issue is, right? And you have to dig. So yes, library school, I mean, for me and working in libraries, it really prepared me well to work in other, county government jobs, local government jobs. But yes, I will always love librarians and see how skilled they are. And I know what librarians have to deal with every day too, right? So yeah, that's a great question.
Mm-hmm. Kind of bouncing off that a little bit, Amy, you talked about kind of the reference skills of being able to get to what people are really looking for. I'm curious from our other panelists, what are the skills, what other skills do you think people should start to highlight as they're looking for jobs outside of libraries?
Have you written grants?
Mm-hmm.
Being able to do the research and compose a clear train of thought, not completely relying on AI, right? That you can discuss knowledgeably. That's going to be really useful. And grant writing is still going on, of course. So people are still hiring grant writers, even though I know there's not a lot of money right now, but people are doing that. And I think that and managing a budget, managing a large budget. If you've done that, that's an important skill to look for. Yeah, I think some of the comments I've seen in the chat, I feel like I identify with. So I did not necessarily have all of the skills that this job would have preferred. So I had never been a public library director, and I had never worked in an academic library. And truly, the best person for a job that serves all library types would be familiar with all of those things and with historical societies, museums, archives, and hospital libraries, and so on. But I was still willing to apply because I knew I could gain some of the skills. And actually, I felt like I had networked outside of the school community enough to have learned by listening to other people. So those friendships you make with people in organizations and associations that you meet at conferences, by listening to them, learning, asking questions, I had at least an idea that these were things I felt capable of learning once I was given the opportunity And I also had a wonderful former director who was willing to give me some coaching when I started. So sometimes the skills that seem so mundane, like the communicating through written word and finding the answer to a problem and managing a large budget, those translate well even into, I think, the commercial, working in the business sector. I think those skills are also useful there.
Mhm.
Can I just add too, and I know this may not be popular, but this really helped me. I don't think I can overstate how much, whether you've been in libraries for a while or not, it's really easy to have a resume that is written like for other library people, right? So when I even when I applied for the library director job, I was really struggling with my resume. And so I did hire someone to help me with it. Like there's online services, all of these things. And even if you aren't fortunate enough to be able to afford that, I do think I can't overstate like how important it is for like non-library people to review, to give you comments, because they reframed so many of the things and skills that I thought I had to put it into like just different language, right? Or even like not using the word patrons, use the word customer. Like even those little things, like it helps to show just, on that one sheet or those two sheets of paper that your skills are transferable. Like you absolutely can do this. And I can't overstate that enough. Like it's really hard, it's really easy to get that tunnel vision of, but if you are looking elsewhere, open to other things, definitely, reach out for help, get other people who are not in libraries to help with that all important resume and cover letter for those pieces. I'll just add that.
Absolutely. And I think part of the culture of libraries sometimes, and hopefully this is going away a little bit, is a bit of a self-effacing, not really willing to do tooting your own horn as much as you should. And I think that feels like a culture shift between business. And I wonder, Amy, even in your own change to property records, if you see that cultural change there.
Yeah, a little bit. I think it's hard for me to exactly know because in Minnesota, we also don't like to toot our horns, right? Like Minnesotans, we don't really like to all the time, but I can't express how important that is either because in interviews and all of that, like it doesn't come off as you being, overly confident. Like it comes off really well. We want to hear all the good things that you do. And also in interviews, I'll say too, like it's not us against the person interviewing. Like we want you to succeed. Like we want you to be that perfect candidate for what we're looking for. Like we really, really do. So I always encourage people to keep that in mind too, and sell yourself. It's like anything. It's hard, but like you have to sell yourself. And if you don't tell me and explain it to me in a way I can understand of all you can do for me, how else am I going to know? So you absolutely have to.
Mhm. Yes, apply for the job, even if you don't have all the qualifications. Use as many words as possible because they're scanned digitally. That's the secret that our HR person told me. Because I was like, no, no, I want to like say it a different way. I want to use different words. I want to be creative. And she's like, no, 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 just use all the words because digital services are looking for that. Okay.
I think
Do,
Amy's right, though,
yeah.
that being able to, once you've made it to the interview stage, you know that you've passed a major hurdle. And so now it's your chance. When else do you get to spend that 45 minutes, an hour, however long? If it's academic, it's days talking about yourself and really listening to what the interviewer or the interview panel is asking you. And one of the skills I think that cannot be overestimated is being quick-witted and quick thinking. That you can practice the skill with your family and your friends, whether they like it or not, to say, to know exactly what someone's asking you and then being able to respond without a big gap. So those are some of the skills I think that we can develop. And a lot of librarians, if you're a reference, you know that you're part of a reference interview here, and that involves quick thinking. and processing information very quickly because nobody wants to stand around at the reference desk while you try to figure out what they're asking. You're asking additional questions, and that's legit in an interview as well. What do you really need, Amy, in this property records person that you're trying to hire? And here is how my library experience translates into that just perfectly.
Now I feel a lot of pressure to just leap right on your point. Anne, a lot of pressure. Okay, let's see. Um, I saw something come by in the chat that I don't want to let disappear, which is the question, we were talking a little bit earlier about the changes that libraries have gone through. Major points in social history can often lead to differences and changes to libraries. And in addition to COVID, of course, lots of libraries had a pretty large reckoning, particularly in Minnesota, around the murder of George Floyd. Um, and there was a comment that kind of zipped past in the chat about libraries not being the most welcoming environment for BIPOC staff, for staff with disabilities. And I am curious to hear. I'm not sure I'm not sure what I'm asking here. But I want to absolutely underline the point that this is an issue in libraries. And in many ways, libraries may be working on this, but it's certainly still a concern. Can anybody help me out here? Alyssa, please.
Yeah, I'm actually the one that made that comment. I am a Black woman who is actually now disabled. Haven't always been disabled in libraries. This is a recent chronic illness. And I'm now navigating the that wonderful line of dealing with racism in libraries, uh, wanting to change the racism and, being an activist in libraries, which caused a lot of stress, which was one of the factors of getting a chronic illness, actually.
Hmm.
I wrote an article with a colleague of mine discussing anti-racism in libraries and how it needs to kind of be overhauled from the top down. And that little minute changes in personal libraries can only do so much. And yeah, I mean, people have, piled on to that comment saying similar things that it's really stressful trying to get people to change in this library, field is very very centered on white women and it's hard to make moves and make changes. And even more difficult when, you try to make suggestions of getting more BIPOC into libraries. It's hard to get people in when the field is the way that it is. I don't want to introduce people to the same stresses that I've had in the field, so yeah, I'm not really sure what I'm saying either, but there's a lot that needs to be done.
And there was a comment came up in the chat as well, talking about that public libraries are interested in checking boxes and pretending that they're doing something, but not really necessarily doing the work. Hmm. There's such a, and also, Alyssa, if you wouldn't mind sharing the article, I'd love to see that. Um, I think there's such a large topic around bringing, trying to diversify the staff of libraries, right? And a lot of hiring done on lower levels, certainly, if hiring people who maybe don't have the education, but come from the community, which can be awesome. But how are we transforming all the way up? Is there a stopping point in there? And then how can library systems, which, we're all are welcome, everything is good. Why is there that disconnect? And what can be done? A bunch of questions.
And I think our goal might not be to transition out of the library systems that have these issues, but and also not rely on one individual like Alyssa to bring up these issues, but to somehow develop that coalition of supporters so that all library staff are treated with the respect that they deserve. I agree. Stephanie made a point about moving to Minnesota, where truly, if you come from an area where I came from Washington, D.C., and when I first moved to Minnesota, I wondered, do any people of color live in Minnesota? Because it's a very segregated society here. I think that after the George Floyd murder and the aftermath of that just really highlighted that to me. So I don't have any solutions other than please call me out if um, I am saying the wrong thing or doing those microaggression statements that I may not even recognize. So something I notice Alyssa put in here too that, she often speaks out and people don't like that. Well, my advice is one, don't necessarily move to Minnesota where nobody speaks out. And I, on the other hand, really do like to speak truth to power. And I am forthright. I'm not Minnesotan. And I think almost anybody who meets me realizes that pretty quickly. But you do need to develop the people who are willing to speak up with you or on your behalf in certain situations. And, people will be reactive and defensive because they're embarrassed by their bad behavior, but they need to be called out.
Mhm. Alyssa, thank you for sharing those links. Oh, I'm sorry, Anne, were you?
No, I was just reading the comments out loud.
Oh, okay.
Small town Indiana does not like people who speak truth to power, and neither does Wisconsin. But somebody has to start. And, it's easy for me to say because, I'm looking at the end of my library career, but I've also done this my whole career. And, when you live in Washington, work in Washington, D.C., and at HUD and at the National Restaurant Association, we were always dealing with people on Capitol Hill who, one, think they know more than anybody else and regard information as a commodity, which really is non-librarian. You know, I would have the lobbyists at National Restaurant Association say to me, oh, if you need, I need this for Senator whoever. If you need something from Senator whoever, just ask me. I said, no, I'll just call them myself. I know where to get this information. But anyway, you just have to be able to stand up to the people that are not acting in the way librarians should act, in my opinion.
I
It
would just like
does.
to make one point
Yeah,
about this,
Kelsey.
the standing up and speaking out is that that's something that we all have a responsibility to do for each other and not just when it's happening to one of us. I think that that can be one of the most powerful ways to speak up is when you see something happening to others because it's important to be a good community member and to be a good neighbor.
Mhm. With that, I just looking at the time here, and I think if there's any further questions that you haven't said, a piece that you've been thinking about that you really want to share today, and to our panel, what is your advice if people are looking to move out of libraries? I will give my piece of advice right now as I wait for people to say, me, let me talk. Um, Build a resilient network. Talk to people, meet people, get to know people. Um, we are even if you're in that small town, there are so many people out in the world who could be really wonderful allies for you in your career and personally. And I've never asked a librarian or a library staff person for their contact information or to have a conversation or to have coffee, and they haven't been absolutely willing to do so. I think people like to talk about themselves, and I think we do know that we're stronger together. So if you can build that network, and yes, Kelly, I wish they taught it too, but I bet maybe this series has something coming up on networking.
For Minnesotans, anyway.
Well, yeah.
And for those
Y'all
not in
just
Minnesota, we did a whole session about it. So you can find that in the replay links because it is an absolutely integral part and we want to make it easy.
Mhm.
So foreshadowing for the event to come in Minnesota, and if you're not here, check the links.
Mhm.
If
One thing
MLIS won't teach it, we will.
one last thing I wanted to say was that there is a financial implication to a transition to or from out of a library, from a library to a nonprofit. And to make it a realistic transition and one that you can live with, you really do need to do some cost benefit analysis that is financial, but also emotional and social. You may be leaving your network behind if you transition out of libraries, and is that something to think about? But the financial costs can be significant, because everything changes, whether it's daycare, healthcare, all that. I mean, even the discounts you might get through your healthcare plan, suddenly you have to pay for a gym membership. So all that needs to be considered in your plan to transition out of a library.
I'll add here too. I can't second enough the importance of the networking piece. And I'll say along with that, something that really helped me and why I think I was even given the opportunity to take on this job coming from the library is that I pay a lot of attention to my reputation at work, amongst the other departments here. I worked really hard when I was a library director to make sure we were partnering with other departments and working closely with them and really trying to understand the work that they do. So I think networking, yes, pay attention to your reputation, always like how you're treating people, like not just patrons and that, but also internal partners, internal departments, those kinds of things, I'd say for sure. Also, what really kind of helped me as I was deciding whether or not to transition out of librarianship was I thought long and hard about what drew me to librarianship. Like, what was it about being a library? Like, part of it, I also grew up in a small Indiana town. To that person in the chat, I get you 100%. But I mean, library, I said it, I always say it, like public libraries like saved me when I was a divorced kid who had, parents who just got divorced. I had nowhere else to go. Like libraries really saved me in a lot of ways. And so that's part of what drew me to it. But the other part was the public service piece. Like I love that part. And I get to do that in my job now. Any department, here, like we all do that, the public service piece. So I think be really clear about what draws you and then think about what else could I do that draws on that thing that drew me to libraries as well. Something else too is I think as librarians, as library staff, we like to research. We are very good at deep thinking and doing those things. Not a lot of people are good at that these days. So that's another thing I should have mentioned when I was talking about hiring librarians to work with me now. Play off of that, like really do that research, do that deep thinking, really think through what it is you're trying to accomplish. What are your values? And I know it is a privilege to be able to match up your values with an organization values, and having that match can be, but it is worth it. And to really try to make sure those match up. I'll also, one last thing I'll add to, please consider management and leadership. there is a huge gap right now in people who even want to do it and take on what it means to manage people. So if that even interests you a little bit, please explore that and please try, because in libraries, outside of libraries, everywhere, it's very hard to find people who want to manage people and who want to be that strong leader that we need in so many of our organizations and government and elsewhere. So that's kind of my 2 cents of advice I can give you.
Thank you, Amy. Bethany, any?
I was just sitting here thinking that one of the best things that I did was grow my self-confidence over the years through failures, right? So um, if if you feel like that's an area that is a struggle, I think it's worth investing in coaching, therapy, friends, and then doing what Amy said and really looking at the things you're doing and recognizing their power and their importance. Because if you believe you can do it, you can't always do it, right? I know that. But it makes it easier to picture yourself potentially leaving, changing, trying something different. Um, and if you were like me and didn't kind of naturally have that, it was worth the effort to learn it and to spend some time reading and watching other people who had developed a kind, calm sense of leadership that I admired. So you don't have to be born with it, people. You can really learn it. You really can. And you can build your own confidence so that you feel comfortable and can say, yeah, I know I can do this. So don't give up.
Thank you, Bethany. And final thoughts?
I think I shared my final thoughts.
Okay.
Move forward. What about yours, Carol?
I already gave my final thought, which was resilient network, but now I'm also going to say think about your leadership skills. You know, it may be that the management job that's right in front of you is not the right fit for you, but if you're developing those skills in that network, maybe something will come along that will be a great fit. And with that, I'm still looking at the time, and I'm not sure if somebody else wants to say thank you, but I definitely want to say thank you so much for coming to this session. I really look forward to looking at that chat a little bit more deeply to see where everyone's at, and I thank you for participating. And to Metronet for putting on this series and this specific edition, and as well to our lovely panelists for taking the time to come and talk about their experience. And with that, I'm done. Thank you, people. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.